This screencast is another in my series of roughly 10-minute planning screencasts to help students preparing for, in my case, the IGCSE or Edexcel certificate. The subject today is an essay question from Much Ado About Nothing, based around the character of Don Pedro, and this is taken from the Edexcel certificate sample material. So it's a question that has not yet been examined in the formal exams, and therefore is a possibility for coming up this summer. So we've got a title, and the title is asking us to focus on Pedro and his interactions with other characters. So before you start planning, you've got to consider what the examiners want. They obviously want you to be able to talk about the way Shakespeare presents the character, but they also want you to talk about the way the character interacts, his relationships with the other characters within the play, and of course his links, therefore, to the key themes of the play. And just at first thought, you might be thinking honour. At this stage, you might be thinking deceit. At this stage, you may be thinking other things, and we'll come to them as time goes on. Obviously, your writing will show a knowledge of the text, and I've included a few potentially useful quotations in this presentation. However, in the end, it's up to you to find the quotations that you can make work for yourselves. Don't shirk this task. So, around 10 minutes in an exam, let's see how we get on. I'm thinking of a possible structure that looks something like this for my essay. I might be thinking, first of all, of his relationships with men, and looking at how they work. I might then move to his relationships with women, see how they work, the interactions obviously being the focus of this, and then the thematic linkage of him in, if you like, the wider scheme of the play as a whole, to conclude the essay. Now, you don't have to follow this, but it's the way my mind worked when I looked at the question. And so it looks something like this. We start by showing our knowledge, as always, and we want to show very clearly that it's a man's world into which Pedro arrives. It's set up by Leonato and the messenger, and although Beatrice interrupts, although Beatrice is a phenomenally strong character, you don't want to get sidetracked by her at this stage. A man is arriving in a man's world, and a world in which status is everything, and he has the highest status, not just because he is Don Pedro, Prince of Aragon, but because he has just won a war. He is a man of enormous status, and we see it immediately in his interaction with Leonato, who is a bit of a social climber, who of course is thrilled and addresses him throughout the entire play, as does everybody, as my lord. And we see again that sense of status is being marked the whole time. He arrives with a group of followers, and these will include Benedick and Claudio, and they rely on him for their advancement and for everything that happens. That's very, very important. Benedick will show off for him, and scenes develop around this happening, particularly at the end of the masked ball. And in fact, Beatrice's jibe that he is known as the Prince's Jester really isn't far from the mark, as I think you'll see if you look back at how he essentially performs to make Pedro laugh. He seems to use these men for his entertainment, and of course, as a man of high status, they are his army. If we just focus in on a few of them, we look at Leonato. I've said he's a climber very quickly. You've got a few quotations here on the page. I tell him we shall stay at least a month, and he heartily prays it may be longer, says Pedro of Leonato. Heartily prays. Oily, urging Pedro to stay longer. Leonato is unable to see that the two princes might lie, yet one of them is Don John, who does nothing but lie, and the other is Pedro. In Act 5, once the misnoting has been discovered, he does in Act 5, Scene 1, show some sarcasm almost. The repetition in this line here of some haste, my lord, well, fare you well, my lord. A rare burst of poetry in this play, which is prose dominated. Iambic pentameter, repetition of my lord, something a little sarcastic, I think, coming into Leonato's tone here, but it will quite quickly revert to normality at the end of the act. So we see him interacting with Leonato in a way that possibly allows Leonato's character to develop, but in a way which establishes his status. Claudio and Benedick, almost the same idea. Two sides again of a similar idea. They are his followers. Claudio is very young, almost like a son. Pedro woos hero for him, a courtly love idea of the senior, older, high-ranking man wooing for the junior. And because of this, both Hero and Claudio receive some honour by this action, but also so, of course, does Pedro. He supports Claudio at the wedding and is himself utterly dishonoured by what he believes Hero to have done. It's also worth noting that he's left single at the end of the play, and we will come back to that. His interaction with Benedick is slightly different. It is a much more joking, much more equal in age, if you like, relationship. And he's perfectly happy to deceive Beatrice and Benedick in terms of falling in love, and I put a quotation in here, this idea that he will trick people. He doesn't care what the outcomes are or who might get caught. He really doesn't care about collateral damage. He is using these people to have fun, and that is the level of his interaction with Beatrice and Benedick at the start of the play. By the end of the play, of course, he's been somewhat superseded by Benedick, who takes over, providing the idea for the punishment of John. As you move on, you look at women, and we're still thinking now, we're about 5 minutes into our planning. Beatrice teases. He's also turned on by her, let's be perfectly honest. She teases him, he proposes marriage to her and is rebuffed. He sees Hero slightly differently if he thinks about her at all. She's a pawn in a society game. She doesn't really register in his mind. She can be totally discarded as soon as she's seen to be untrustworthy. Men, it seems, in his world are more trustworthy than women, and he will surround himself by men. Beatrice possibly could be seen as a surrogate man in this way. Marriage is not something he's playing with. He's left alone at the end. He makes one proposal of marriage in the play in a slightly unusual manner. And we wonder what Shakespeare's message is here, and maybe he is beginning to suggest that there has to be some changes in the old order. He focuses on Beatrice in terms of the proposal in Act 2, and I would really look at this in terms of their relationship, because the rejection isn't necessarily what such a powerful man would expect. It's very tactful, it's very polite, and they do seem to part as friends, even though Beatrice is now going to be used in his mind as a pawn to trick Benedick. He doesn't seem to care whether that might cause her pain. Equally with Hero, they don't interact a great deal. We notice he gets Lady Will You Walk About With Your Friend when he starts to woo her in 2-1, but we don't know what the conversation is. We have to rely on what has been overheard and misunderstood and then transmitted to Claudio later by Don John for this. By the time we get to Act 5, after he's supported Claudio in all the accusations, he seems completely bemused. He barely speaks at the second wedding, and what he does say is sort of comic idiocy, really. The former hero that is dead. He seems to be completely unable to register and to work out and to compute what has happened around him, and by the end of the play he is on his own. A play that started with him arriving with such triumph, with all these people and everybody coming to look at him, ends with him isolated and him on his own, and that sense of shift is something that I think you do want to bring out if you can. When you're looking at honour, yes, he proposes for Claudio, he takes Hero under his patronage, courtly love. Honour is offended when she is thought to be unfaithful. If you're looking at noting and misnoting, of course, he's mistakenly assumed to be wooing for himself, and he acts on what he thinks is seen, not what is proven, and that will interact with people in a variety of ways. He is deceitful. His gulling of Benedick, which, if you like, might be one of the main interactions of Benedick, may be certainly what I class as good deceit. But it's still deceit. He seems to be a positive version of his brother. Yes, John is the dark side, but I think we have to recognise that Pedro is just as unfeeling about those around him as John. He's just using it for a different purpose. In terms of love, he does propose to Beatrice, and it comes as a surprise, possibly to them both. Shakespeare puts it in as such a straightforward, will you have me, declaration, question, to be taken seriously without any of the usual trappings of sort of the Tudor love routines. Maybe he is genuinely attracted to her, but if he is, he leaves it behind very, very quickly, and for him we get the impression that love is a game to be practiced on his friends, and again we comment that he's alone by the end of the play. His interaction both presents characters to the audience. It's interesting how little he says in many of the scenes in which he is on stage. People address him. His interaction allows characters to be seen developing and growing up, and also early in the play, particularly to show off in the case of Benedick. But it's through his interaction with these characters that we really do see the change. In Act 5, Scene 1, when Benedick leaves his protection, having challenged Claudio, this is a huge moment of Benedick growing up, becoming an individual, as opposed to this man who really is the prince's jester. So his interaction with Benedick allows the character of Benedick to be seen to change. It's possible that within this play there is also a critique of a complacent aristocracy at the time, and a celebration, if you like, of a more natural human interaction seen in the characters of Beatrice and Benedick. Elsewhere, I've talked on the blog about the balance of prose and verse in this play, and there is a hypothesis that suggests that the absence of verse in the relationship of Beatrice and Benedick goes to show just what a down-to-earth, normal, rooted pair they are. Do we see in Pedro a sense that the old ways, the courtly love, the rather grandiose, certainly semi-misogynistic, certainly very selfish ways of behaving of an aristocracy are no longer sensible? He is, after all, despite all the interactions of the play, alone at the end. And that is a point worth concluding your essay upon. There you go. 10-minute plan. May not be the greatest essay in the world, plenty in there to hang your hat from. For an exam essay, you've now got 30 minutes, 35 minutes to write those thoughts. The thought process is clear, it is organised, you know where you're going, and now you can write. Good luck.